Okay, we can get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to week 9 of Figma Decal. Today, we'll be talking about illustration mainly. And also, good job turning in midterms from last week. And yeah, today we're going to announce like the final, which will be like you'll have a good amount of time to do that. So, this is just an introduction. And then talk about some illustration basics, recap of like the pen tool and fill and effects, and then that'll be it. But here's the attendance link. Yeah. So type that in for a second. And then here's also the slide deck link. Yeah, feel free to type this in and then make like a duplicate of this file so that you can edit it yourself and then explore like the examples and demos with us. But yeah, I will now like introduce what the final is, and you can kind of like create your own final project proposal. Kind of like in a similar way to the midterm. You can kind of choose whatever you want it to be, and you can use like some examples of like guides of what you might do. Very similar to like what the midterm was, but this time like using some more of the tools that we've learned over the whole course of the semester. But yeah, our goal for this final and like for the class in general is for you to find something that you're interested in actually making and then seeing like that vision come through from like your lo-fi to hi-fi product by using like the skills that you've learned in this class. So hopefully it's something that you actually find interesting and that like something that you want to see made or designed, and then you can kind of flesh that out yourself. And yeah, all you have to do is like incorporate at least two of these skills. So this includes auto layout, variants, prototyping, and illustration. You can choose like any two combinations. And so proposals are due next Tuesday. And this is kind of just like a quick write-up of what your project idea is and like a short description. And then select your two concentrations of like the specific skills that you want to incorporate, and then what you kind of want to have done for your midpoint check-in, which is like in 2 weeks on the 19th. And then we'll give like some feedback on your proposals after you turn it in. And then the midpoint check-in will be due Tuesday, November 19th at midnight. And this will be like a Figma file. So a lot of times people just do like lo-fi sketches or like kind of just low fidelity versions of what you want to do. So at least like it shows that you're going in a direction at least, and then you can get more feedback as you develop that too. So for the submission for the final project, like the midterm, it'll be a PDF of the write-up. So this basically just like walks us through your design process and what you were thinking as you created this and like kind of why of their final product. And then it'll also have like the link to the Figma file in it. And yeah, it's like 300 words max, and describe like your proposal in brief and yeah, just your design process. And then this will be due on Monday, December 2nd. So this is the night before our last class, which is like our final showcase. So we'll also send out a form that will ask you if you would like to present your final on our last class of the showcase. And you could just like quickly show us like what you did and like your final prototype if you want. It's really quick and you don't even have to say a lot, but yeah, we would love to have you share what you did, and so everyone can kind of see like what everyone else made. And it's very, very casual, but yeah, any questions about the final? Okay. So we'll go into kind of more illustration now, and just like a quick gallery of some examples of illustration that were made in Figma. So this is like someone's vector illustration. It's like very like space oriented and yeah, very colorful and like dark. Um, and then someone made like little game consoles, all vectorized, and made patterns with these. Someone also did like these really cool tiny calculators, which are like showing different calculators throughout time and very, very detailed, but very clean. And then this like uses more gradients to make like a house and yeah, very precise and very neat. This is like looks like an emoji basically, but they made like a more realistic looking briefcase and yeah, lots of interesting gradients here. Someone even did like a redesign of Soul. Um, and yeah, this has like a bunch of gradients and a lot of cool outlines, and it's kind of crazy. This is also another like isometric design, and someone did this, which is like really impressive because it looks like very realistic. It looks like a photograph almost, but this was all made in Figma. Um, and yeah, so many like designs and effects. And it's crazy what you can do with like this tool that like is mainly used for like UI UX, but there's so many like illustrative properties that you can use in this software. So it's really cool to explore that. So yeah, what is illustration? Illustration is just like visual imagery that expresses or communicates something. And it can be like literal or in the traditional sense, like drawings and graphics. And, you know, sometimes have text to accompany to illustrate something written. But yeah, illustration is a very broad term and it's very varied. So a visual can tell a story or communicate without having any text, and it's also not limited to a particular medium. But there's, you know, a thousand ways that you could illustrate something. Within illustration is a type of illustration called vector illustration, which we've kind of talked about in the beginning of this course. But vectors are lines, points, and curves that maintain like a specific structure throughout the computations of like having it like digital. And this is like more of a medium than a style of art or illustration because vector graphics can look different. Like all of these are considered vectors. But what makes them like all common is the fact that when you're computing this, like in the behind the scenes of this artwork or this graphic, it's all like mathematic based and you know, not pixel based. So that way it maintains like its ratio and detail, which is very useful for you know, sending these to other types of ratios or screens and stuff like that. But yeah. Some principles of illustration that we'll talk about today are perspective, color, and composition. And there's like a tons of other ones that we could also talk about, like light, silhouette, scale, texture. But we'll start with these three. So this is like perspective, color, and composition. But before we dive in, we're gonna do like a quick activity. And so in a Figma file, you can like either use your slide deck file or like a new one, but we're gonna like just draw a childhood memory or something that's like related to your childhood. It could be like a toy or like a food or like a place. But just to like get more familiar with illustrating in Figma, you can use like the pen tool or just the pencil tool to like doodle something. But we'll take like 10 minutes to just like draw something from your childhood in Figma. Does that make sense? Okay. Have fun with it. It can be as simple or as detailed as you like, but yeah, I'll play some music while we do that. I will also partake in this activity myself. can like talk if you want. I hope you guys are all actually doing this.
You just sneezed and flew 10 feet in the air. Really? You feel higher than that.
Well, good job, everyone. I hope you got your illustrative skills brewing. But yeah, lots of fun stuff you can illustrate in Figma. So have fun with it. Um, but yeah, now we'll move on to talking about perspective, which is like one of the like components of illustration. But yeah, perspective is how you like understand three-dimensional objects in a 2D space. And there's like a lot of different ways that you can achieve the 3D look, depending on the different effect that you want to evoke. So you can make something look realistic or more exaggerated or disorienting based on the perspective that you choose. And sometimes, especially in vector work, you may not even want it to appear 3D at all. So yeah, let's get into it. So there's different types of perspective, and the first one is one point perspective, which kind of means like everything converges to one point, like in the distance, which is like the vanishing point. And then this is like linear perspective, so you create a sense of depth through clear structure that directs the eye. And with that like one vanishing point that you establish, you can like draw all of the lines, all of like the straight lines that you'd like look at will be like going to that one point. So like all the edges of a cube or any like object that you create would like converge to that point in the back. So this is like how you can kind of create that 3D space within this 2D image. Um, and then there's also a different kind of one point perspective. Actually, it's the same kind, but like having objects in different places around that point can also add to this like look of perspective. And when you create a horizontal line that the vanishing point is set on is called the horizon line, which is like basically looks like, you know, real life, how when you look out into the distance, you see a horizon. And yeah, generally speaking, with this kind of perspective, like the closer or the farther away something is, the smaller it is, and the smaller it gets as it goes further away from you. So you can kind of see in this example, the back part of the cube is getting smaller than the front part. Um, but yeah, you can also work with 2 point perspective where you add another vanishing point on the same horizon line to create something a little different. But these are examples of 1 point perspective. So these are all kind of converging to one point in the back, like down this road or at the end of this like hall or on the bridge, like slightly offset. So then there's also isometric perspective, which is kind of like parallel projection. So it's not really converging at all, but everything on this like isometric grid of your canvas is all the same size. And yeah, at the core of it, it's like two sets of parallel lines that run through an entire piece. And the sets form these natural diamonds, which are preserved throughout a piece. So on the top of this cube, you can see this diamond shape. And on an isometric grid, it's basically all these diamond shapes. So if you have like a cube or an object or something in this 3D space, no matter where you move it around, it'll stay the same size and dimensions. And this allows you to make something appear 3D while it's like not exactly realistic, but it maintains like the construction of that object. So a lot of examples of isometric perspective are in like a video games, and a lot of like grid layout things. So yeah, mostly video games, but it's fun to make art pieces or illustrations in isometric because you don't have to really think too hard about the um like converging lines or what size something is if it's farther away because they're all like respectively the same size, but it still looks a little more has more depth. And there's also atmospheric perspective, which uses the atmosphere in a sense to create an illusion of like depth through an illustration. So you have like reduced clarity and adjusted value, saturation, temperature, size, and things like that. So like the idea behind it is in real life, like if something is farther away, it starts to lose like the saturation of the color due to like the atmosphere. So it's using not just like lines or shapes to convey depth in 3D, but the color and the clarity of it. And this is more often used in paintings where you can generally understand it as another way of communicating distance without rules as strict as linear perspective. So these are some other examples. You'll see like the mountains in the background versus the foreground are a lot more like gray toned and less saturated in color. And this is kind of like mimics what natural life is like. And then you also just have like regular 2D flat art. And a lot of the time, vector art and graphic design doesn't really stick to any of these rules because sometimes you just don't need 3D and you want something a little more simple. So, flat design refers to a specific visual style, often in the context of UI UX, that uses simple shapes and bold colors. It often isn't very realistic or representational, but more like simplistic and used to like convey simple things. So, for this conversation surrounding perspective, we can hone into the fact that not all art needs depth or the appearance of three dimensionality, but it's there if you want to add like something a little more dynamic. And yeah, this list is not exhaustive. Experiment with what you need to convey and don't be afraid to trust your own judgment. Um, you don't have to start every illustration with like, which of these like three perspectives should I choose from? But what's more important is the information that you want to convey and trust your intuition to what you think looks right. Because after all, like we're designing for like users or an audience, and you're also like a part of that group of people. You are a user too. So, if something looks nice to you or looks bad to you, that's probably like the same for everyone else. So, trust your judgment to a point. Um, but yeah, if you want like something more realistic and structured, you can try like one point perspective. If you want something a little more abstract and clear, try isometric. But if you want just like flat and bold design, you can just do like 2D art. Moving on to color. We've also touched on this before, I think, but yeah, color is like something that's really important for just like conveying messages subconsciously and not or unintentionally because people like automatically process color and that can really affect how someone interacts with something. Different palettes can create different atmospheres and emotions, and understanding when and how to use colors is important for you to communicate what you want to communicate. So, color in design is used to attract attention, evoke emotion and meaning, and organize similar elements together or add a strong aesthetic for usability. And the wide variety of color use and application is very apparent in aspects of everything that we interact with. Everything has a color by default. So you might have seen like a color wheel before, and here's what it looks like. You can kind of see like the primary colors in like the trisectors of this like wheel. And these are colors that you can't make from others, so like red, yellow, and blue. And then you also have secondary colors, which are the combinations of those primary colors, which are like green, orange, and purple. And then within all of these, there's also tertiary colors, which are mixes between adjacent primary and secondary colors. So you have like, red, orange, blue, green, things like that. And these are like the main colors, if you will. And we talked about like the color psychology behind all of these hues and kind of the emotions that these all evoke and ways that you can utilize these in your designs to communicate to your user. But here are like the three components of a color. So you have your hue, which is like where on the color wheel is it? Is it blue, green, yellow? And then saturation is how intensely pigmented a color is. So like is it very bright or is it like more toned down? And then value is like how light or dark it is, so how much black is in the color. So yeah, hue is like the actual color, what you would call it. And then saturation is if you move like left on like the color picker in Figma, it gets like more white. And then if you go like down and up, you'll get to like more black, which is the value of the color. Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but um in addition to, having color components, there's also ways that you can break down color in terms of um like digital colors. And there's a lot of different like color theories and stuff, and which kind of is like the backbone for these. But yeah, you can like break down a color into like numbers that make it a lot easier to translate what color it is. So we have like RGB, hex, CMYK, HSV, LB. And these are like color codes basically for every color that's possible. And like RGB, for example, stands for like red, green, and blue. It tells you like how much of each of those primary or not primary, R, G, and B is in that color to create the one that is resulted. So we have this like red, and RGB for this color right here is like 236 amount of red, and then like 36 of green and 36 of blue. So it's more red in this, so it looks more red. And if you were to like adjust those numbers, it might make it more green if you increase the second number, or more blue. And then hex is hexadecimal for these colors, and this is usually used in web, especially software. And then lastly is CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which is used for print. So like if you print something on paper from a printer, it'll use like different amounts of these four colors to create the one that you want. And yeah, often that's for like print and not digital. But Figma allows you to kind of edit your colors in any of these formats, but hex is the default. And then there's also an extra number for opacity sometimes. So that's like how visible it is or how transparent. But yeah. Um, so creating palettes. Now that we've understood like what colors are made of and how they're organized, we can also create them in combinations to create color palettes, which are like shortcuts to create something that looks good and cohesive. So we can also break down all the colors by temperature, which there's warm colors and cool colors, and these kind of like, I don't know what they're really based on, but I guess they kind of reflect like on how your body reacts to these colors. So like yellow, orange, red, those are all very warm. And I guess you can associate those with like the sun, or like something that's like lava is hot and fire. And then the cool colors are like green, blue, and purple. And this is like, more like water, snow, grass, and nature. Um, but yeah, you can really use temperature a lot, and like the psychology and emotion behind colors to manipulate a design. Um, like also for example, we have like black and white backgrounds and then different variations of whites and blacks, but the top two are like warm toned black and white, and then the bottom are cool toned. So it's kind of like more grayish blue and then like more orangey reddish. But yeah, very, very subtle differences, but very also noticeable. There's also different color schemes that you can kind of try out when making a color palette. So you have complementary, which are like on the color wheel. If they're like directly opposite colors, then they're complementary. And this maximizes like the contrast of them. And then analogous colors are like, they're like right next to each other on the color wheel. And these ones are more similar, but one color typically dominates of these three. You can also do triadic, which is kind of like split on the color wheel. So like all the primary colors together would be triadic, but these are evenly spaced out, and they're vibrant but require careful balance between them because they're all very different. And then split complementary is variation on the opposite, and this has strong contrast but less tension and more variety. So yeah, you can use these kinds of color schemes to create your palettes, and automatically they'd be like good choices because they're based on like the color theory. But this is like some examples complementary of like orange and blue, analogous, which is like mostly all green tones, triadic, which is has like the primary colors, and then split complementary with like purple as its like main one, and then it kind of has the counterparts of like orange and yellow tones. But yeah, there's like a bunch of color palettes online too that you can choose from that already are good choices. And a lot of them are already visually pleasing because they usually keep one of those properties relatively consistent, like complementary or triadic or things like that. And they're similar in hue, saturation, or value across the palette, which automatically brings like more unity to it. And this is like not a hard rule that you have to follow, but it can certainly help you out, especially if you're not sure about what colors to use. It's always like a safe bet to use like these kinds of color palettes. And also while you're making palettes, these can be helpful, but you also want to um, like make sure they're fit into the context of what they're being put in. So keep an eye out on like contrast in two ways. You can maximize your accessibility and then leverage high or low perceived contrasts to your advantage. So like the color on the left, it's like very hard to see this rectangle, but on the right, it's a little easier. But all in all, it's not that easy to read or like discern the contrast between them. So you kind of want to make sure you know what color you're going to put this color on, if that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot to know when it comes to colors, and one final thought that we'll leave you with is how light affects color. If you're familiar with the blue black or white gold dress meme from like a long time ago, you've seen like an example of how color can play tricks on your eyes based on the lighting. And if you consider like the full context of an object and how it will appear, this will like kind of manipulate what you see. And you might need to adjust colors to appear something as believable, even if a blue object isn't strictly blue anymore. So these are some examples of different lightings, and these are all like a yellow cube and a white sphere on the top. But in like a blue light and a yellow light, they appear like to be different colors. Like the yellow cube looks kind of green under a blue light. Um, and then the white ball obviously like absorbs whatever color is in the light. And yeah, some other things. We'll move on to composition. So composition kind of refers to the way that all of your elements are laid out in something or organized and how they kind of interact with each other to create like a dialogue of sorts. While there's like an infinite number of visually appealing compositions, there are some general rules that you can use to your advantage when you're trying to create a composition that works. So one of like the biggest kinds of composition rules is the rule of thirds. It's even like on your phone camera automatically. But in short, it splits the canvas into 9 equal like squares or rectangles. And the eye is like naturally drawn to the resulting intersection of these thirds. And illustrations can thus place important elements at those intersections and along the lines to, create something that looks visually appealing and clear to the eye. So dividing parts of a piece into thirds can also help create a naturally pleasing layout. Here's like some examples. This is like a painting by Dali. Um, you'll see like he kind of lines up like the main big elements of the foreground onto points of this grid. So like at this intersection point and kind of around here. It's not like super clear, but you get the gist. Or in this like movie picture, they're like focused in at like one of the intersections on the top right, and it like looks very like equally balanced and spaced out and very pleasing. And the scene from La La Land, she's like positioned at both of the vertical lines, and overall the picture looks like very aesthetic and very pleasing and something you wouldn't even notice or think about because it looks good. There's also visual triangles that you can utilize for composition. It's exactly what it sounds like, using a triangle to kind of use leading lines and shapes and line things up in that triangle. Through either implicit or actual triangles, you can create a sense of direction and even depth sometimes. Even if they aren't aiding in perspective per se, triangles are a strong basis for compositions and they're clear enough to be identified implicitly, but interesting enough to direct your eye across a piece. So you can see triangles in like the Mona Lisa, how she takes up like most of the space, but it's like tapered from her head to like her sides. Or in this painting of like a dog fight, you'll see like the subtle triangles that they use to create something that's more interesting. Or just like in this like picture, um, she makes like a triangle with her arm that's out of frame, but it's still like your brain still computes that. And yeah, this is like an example from Harry Potter covers. You can see triangles in these. The next one is movement. And while you may be like creating a lot of 2D images, you can create like more dynamics and movement through implied lines of action. So this is like a good example in like Starry Night. All like the swirls are like directed in movement, and that makes it like more interesting to look at. And like there's more life into the painting. So key elements of a piece can be positioned to create this sense of movement. You can interpret this literally like capturing an image of someone running, or more figuratively like communicating movement through stroke or gestalt principles. But yeah, this is like the famous Japanese painting of the wave, a very nice, satisfying movement there. Even like with this perspective, you can see it kind of like since it tapers to that vanishing point, and there's like objects in it that are moving towards that. You can create movement that way, or like of a dancer, the way her body is positioned and like her limbs are kind of like unnaturally posed. It looks like she's like swaying a lot more exaggeratively. And then we also have negative space, which is one of the like Gestalt principles, as mentioned before. But it uses like distribution and hierarchy to create this component. Um, so negative space refers to like the area of your canvas where there's like a lack of something actually. And it's typically like black or white or whatever color the background is, but you can be like very intentional with how you use this negative space. So you kind of have like two pictures in one. Like this example, there's like it looks like a flame, but there's also like two people's like lips in the negative space, which is like not something you see upon first glance, but it adds like a deeper meaning to this image. Um, but yeah, here's one, and it's like someone playing piano, but actually I don't really know what this is supposed to be, but there's some negative space in there. This triangle, perhaps. And this is like from like Spider-Verse. You can see like the landscape or the cityscape is like upside down, and like the main character is like in that embedded, but you kind of get like this feeling of like, it's very wide and vast of an expanse. Um, and yeah, it also uses like triangles in this as well. You can also utilize color and combination composition together to create your illustrations and make it even more interesting. But yeah, everything from brands to traditional artists to filmmakers use these principles to inform their work, and you can also do that. Here are some images from Akira, the movie, that's using like a very consistent color palette of this like red and like greenish blue throughout the movie, and using like all these different compositions to kind of create different interesting scenes. And yeah, here's another example of kind of like using color and composition together. So still kind of like red and greenish, but yeah, you can kind of see the different kinds of composition that they use throughout. Any questions so far? Illustration, composition, color. Okay. now we'll do like a quick recap of the pen tool. If you don't know where it is, it's on like your bottom toolbar of your design file, and it looks like that. And you can just push P to quickly go to it. And then always remember that like to actually edit the points of your vector, you can like double click it, and then you'll enter vector edit mode, which then you can edit the specific nodes or like the Bezier curves, or even do like a paint bucket tool. But yeah, this is the anatomy of a Bezier curve that we talked about before, but you have like your node and then the path it's on, and you can adjust the handles to correspondingly change the curve of that point. And also in your vector panel, when you have like curves, you can also change the settings of the angles and lengths to create like different kinds of curves. So you can either like have sharp curve, or actually not curves, sharp edges or points. If you don't have any mirroring on, then you can adjust each side of that point independently. You can also mirror just the angle or mirror the angle and the length. And then while you have a vector, if it has like different like enclosed portions of it within the same vector network, you can use the paint bucket tool while you're in vector edit mode, and then kind of like fill one space of your vector. For this, you just have to make sure that it's like one vector together and it's actually like enclosed and like the points are connected so that you can actually fill in. But yeah, that can be useful. You can fill, yeah, with multiple colors, have different colors within one vector by using the paint bucket tool and the eyedropper tool also, if you want to quickly pick a color from anywhere on your canvas. But yeah, some tips for custom vectors. When it comes to vectors, there's honestly only so much that we can teach you through lecture, but when you actually use it in practice, you can kind of get a better feel of how you use them. And but here are some tips. You can like heal nodes, which is kind of like if you notice that on a straight line, there's a phantom node that will appear on the center of the line. And so it's not actually there, but if you want to add one, you can like hover over the middle of a line and one will pop up like directly in the middle. And then also, regardless of whether you made like midline nodes on purpose or not, you can delete them without actually deleting the line by holding shift and like clicking backspace on any of your nodes in your vector. There's like one caveat though, since if you delete a node sometimes it may like adjust differently without it there, but you can like kind of handle that by adjusting the curves around it. And then while you're editing your vector, you can also use the bend tool to create curves. If you want to like put all your points down and have like sharp corners, then you can go in after with the bend tool to make everything curve nicely. You can just hold like command or control, and then that will allow you to bend each point quickly. Also, if you have like a lot of wobbly lines in your design, this may be like a problem if you use the pencil tool to like doodle something instead of like the pen tool to place the points. But you can always use these shortcuts to like heal the nodes or like get rid of more nodes in order to have sometimes less is more with vectors, and the less nodes you have, the more smooth it'll look. But yeah, so here's like an example. The one on the left is like not very neat because there's so many random points and nodes in your vector. But if you clean it up and kind of have them evenly spaced and like the minimum amount of nodes, then it'll be a lot smoother. And then some more about like fills and effects. I'm sure you've already like seen gradients in your fill panel, but you can edit like any color or any fill to interesting gradients. There's a lot of cool ones to choose from, and I suggest like playing around with them to kind of see what works and what's fun. But you can apply these to fills and strokes. I'll kind of hurry up, but yeah, there's linear gradients, radial gradients, angular, and diamond. So yeah, have fun with gradients. Color styles are also a way to like reuse types of fills throughout your canvas. So you can save either just like solid colors or also gradients to reuse them for different elements. Um, yeah, there's also four kinds of effects that you could apply to any element on your canvas. So these include drop shadow, inner shadow, layer blur, and background blur. And they're all kind of what they sound like. So drop shadow is like a shadow behind the element, and you can adjust like the position and the blur and the color and opacity. Same with inner shadow, but it's like inside your element instead of behind it. Layer blur just like blurs that element, and it's just like one number. And then background blur is like it blurs whatever is behind it. So this is cool to like make the illusion of windows or like frosted glass. You can like put any shape on top of something. If you have like text or like something more detailed behind it, you can turn on background blur. It'll look like you're looking through like glass or something that's, like not very transparent, but kind of. And then you can also play around with a lot of different blend modes to kind of like change the way things intersect and the colors that they create with that. So while you have like any rectangle or any object on top of something, you can change the blend modes of that object on top and then see how it adjusts to like the colors behind it. And for example, like we have this rectangle, it's like purple, and this is just like regular default. It just sits on top of it, full opacity. If you change the opacity to less, then you can kind of see through it. And then if you choose overlay, it'll be a slightly different like mixture with the colors behind it. This is multiply. This is color burn, a little darker. Yeah, I won't really do this too much, but in the blend mode example page on the left, you'll see this example. And if you click on this rectangle on the right, you can play with the different options of blend modes in your appearance panel and just see how that kind of changes the appearance of it. And yeah, some fun things to choose from. That's also good if you want to use textures over your illustrations or anything. You can put that in and then change the blend mode to like make it look a little more seamless and like actual on your design. But yeah. Okay, we'll just wrap up. And the secret word will be watermelon. So type that in your attendance. And yeah, for this week, your homework will be kind of like combined with lab. So there's like a variance-based interactive file with your lab group. And then you'll just like illustrate your own components and then submit your lab file for your homework. But yeah, just start thinking about what you want to do for your final project. And those will be open after today into next week. But also, there's no class next week. Actually, Figma is coming to Berkeley on Tuesday, the 12th. So they're doing like a pop up with a donut truck from 12 to 3 at Lower Sproul. So you should go. There's free merch, and you should definitely get some. And then there's also like a free Figma workshop at night at 6 that you can like register here. There's probably also free merch for that. So yeah, no class, but go support Figma on our campus. And that's it. Thanks, guys, for coming.